Hello, welcome to Storytellers with Christy Lou. My guests tonight are Deb and Bruce Potts, and I'm going to feature their novel, Love on Life Support, which is partially based on their own experience going through Bruce's very unexpected health crisis that dealt with brain trauma. I'm excited because this is the first team written book, and certainly the first husband and wife team written book that I have ever narrated. Bruce and Deb Potts were college sweethearts, married in 1976. The Potts lead the marriage mentor team at their church campus in Orion, Michigan, where they train other mentors and serve couples in crisis and nurture a space where marriages can thrive in community. Deb and Bruce felt compelled to weave their experiences and their know-how as marriage mentors into a captivating story to help encourage anyone going through serious life struggles. And they want to encourage us that no matter what, there is hope. Amen. Hear, hear. So I'm going to pause and get my thoughts together, get myself centered, and I'm going to narrate the prologue and chapter 1 of Love on Life Support, and then I will welcome our guests on. Amy ended the call with shaking hands, then dropped her cell phone in her lap. She felt adrift, cut off from Chris, her husband and anchor. Panic crushed her as she envisioned the worst. Her imagination took over, filling her mind with tragic scenarios. She wailed, feeling helpless and hopeless. I need you now, God. Help me. How much more can I endure? Minutes passed, each one bringing more painful laments. She had never felt as alone or terrified. A worldwide pandemic confined them, Chris in an ICU and her at home alone. He was unreachable now, unable to speak or comprehend what was happening. He was in the hands of strangers, and his life hung in the balance. Worst of all, the last time the two of them were together, they were both so angry they raged at each other. They hadn't even slept in the same bed. She curled up on the love seat in a heap, sobs racking her body. She cried and cried until no more tears came. Then she just lay there, numb and broken. Terrifying thoughts relentlessly tormented her. What if he doesn't make it? I'll never see him or talk to him ever again. No. Please, God, no. I couldn't bear it. After all we've been through, this can't be the end. But what if it is? When love blossomed 23 years ago. Amy wiped her brow with the back of her hand as she surveyed the mess of boxes strewn over the tiny kitchen floor. This is so exciting. I can't wait to cook my first dinner in our first home. She watched Chris across the kitchen from her. He stood on a stepladder, putting seldom-used items into the cupboard above the refrigerator. Are you ready for a break? I'm getting hungry. He grinned over his shoulder at her, stepped down, and took her into his arms. I sure am. This is the last of the kitchen items. I'll break down these boxes before we leave. Should we walk to town for some lunch? Sounds great. Then we can start painting the living room when we get back. I'm going to freshen up. She headed toward the bathroom, appreciating the homey squeaks from the old oak floors. She loved that sound. It reminded her of her grandmother's house. She considered their house a find. They'd spent months waiting for the right historic house to come on the market in Rochester. It finally did, and she was thrilled when their offer was accepted. It was a Sears kit house built in 1923. She loved the large front porch and the small fenced-in yard. The craftsman-style bungalow was a little bit worn around the edges, making it feel like home the moment they moved in. The neighbors were friendly. She thought it would be the perfect place to raise kids. She held his hand as they walked down the street and into the park. Taking this way was a little longer, but she loved walking past their bench where he proposed. We live in a magical place. Do you realize that? She watched a duck cross the path in front of them. I couldn't be happier. I was thinking how wise you were to make sure we had time to focus on each other before we took on the stress of home ownership. And I love that we're building a rainy day fund for unexpected things. We've already made great progress on that. Thanks. He squeezed her hand. I think my parents started out on the wrong foot financially. That led to working long hours apart and putting their relationship on the back burner. He stopped walking and pulled Amy close. I want to do things differently. She nodded. I know. So do I. He gave her a quick peck on the lips. Then they continued walking hand in hand for several moments. By the way, she said, we need to decide about your job offer to join the new robotics firm as VP of Sales. Have you thought any more about it? I can't stop thinking about it. It sounds too good to be true. A new, fully funded joint venture with mostly young staff. Not only is it a great opportunity, but I'd have stock options as well. He pressed his lips together. So, what's making you hesitate? I think it's a big break for you. A startup requires a huge time commitment. I'm worried it'll be hard on us. Long hours and travel later. Are you ready for me to be working long hours? It'll put a lot on you to keep up with everything here. Will we be able to keep our relationship number one? She nodded. Yes, I want you to have this opportunity. If that's the only reason you're holding back, don't. I'm willing to do more around the house to cover for you. I love you so much, and I know you have the skills and the vision to help build something great in this company. Please don't say no because of me. He stopped and pulled her close once more, lifting her up off her feet and twirling her around. Really? You mean it? Thank you. I hated to ask you to make sacrifices for my career, but I've been itching for an opportunity like this. I believe it's a once-in-a-lifetime break. Joy lifted her heart as he put her down, and they continued their walk to town. She pointed across the street at an iconic burger joint. Let's see if we can get seats at Red Knap's Dairy Bar. I've been wanting to try it. Anything for my wife. He put his arm around her as they crossed the street. They sat at the counter. She ordered a chocolate malt, and he ordered a Boston cooler with their burgers. He told her a Boston cooler was Detroit's own Verner's ginger ale and a scoop of ice cream floating in it, which sounded odd to her. She amused herself with twirling around on the red leather bar stools and reading the old-fashioned product ads that lined the walls. She moaned a bit with her first bite of her delicious burger. Chris's eyes widened and he nodded. Good call. They both happily devoured their meals and shared their drinks. She liked the Boston cooler. She rubbed her stomach when they finished. Whew, that was filling, but delicious. He chuckled. Don't worry, you'll burn it off with all the work we have to do. I love decorating, so this part will be fun. She hopped off the bar stool. Race you home? He lifted his eyebrows. She punched him in the arm. Carry me home? They bantered back and forth on the walk back. When they returned, they changed into old clothes. She gathered the paint, brushes, and rollers while Chris covered the living room with a drop cloth. She pulled out the record player and they sang to classic rock as they painted. The windows were open and a cool breeze blew in. Hey, Amy, look. She turned around to see an impish smile on his face. His brush was pointing to a large heart painted on the wall behind him. Inside the heart it said C+A ever. She sauntered over to him, paintbrush in hand, and spoke in a fake southern drawl. Mr. McGrath, that's a mighty fine work of art you created, but you left out the for in forever. He slipped into Youper jargon. No, ma'am, I didn't forget it. C is the third letters, A is the first. C plus A equals 4, don't you know? Forever, eh? He removed his imaginary hat and bowed. She took her wet brush and lightly tapped his muscled arm. Is that so? He paused as his eyes locked on hers, then traced a long, thin line of paint down her arm, finishing with a flourish. She looked down at her arm, tossing her brush on the drop cloth that covered the floor. She took his face in her hands and kissed him, long and slow. He dropped his brush and wrapped his arms around her. She pulled away briefly to whisper, We can finish painting tomorrow. There we go. Hey, I can hear you now.
Okay.
So welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks so much. We appreciate it.
Yeah. So we kind of have to start with Bruce, I think, on this. I want to make sure that we understand the background on how this book came to be, because it's beautiful and unusual, both for a husband and wife to write a novel together. But I think we have to begin with what happened in the spring of 2020 with Bruce. So if you want to take it away, Bruce.
Okay, thanks. I have to say that when you read the prologue, it sounded even scarier to me than real life was at that time. So you do a good job with the reading. But I had been having headaches for an extended period of time, probably 3 or 4 months, tried a bunch of different things to diagnose what they were, and they just kept getting worse. Finally, I had an MRI, and the doctor or the radiologist had to stop it in the middle and ask if I had fallen or hit my head, which I hadn't to my knowledge. But apparently there was an arrangement of blood from a bleed in my brain that was about the size of a man's hand and had pushed my brain from the left to the right about 1 inch. And so he wouldn't even let me drive to the hospital. I either had to go in an ambulance or call Debbie to come and take me. So she came and took me. And then they wouldn't even let her out at the emergency room portico. They had to make her wait outside. And 30 days later, I finally came home and had only seen her once in that period of time.
Had you ever gone that long in your married life without seeing each other?
No,
No,
I'm sure.
no, it wasn't.
Mm-mm. Not
Married
at
in
all.
1976 all the way to 2020. That's quite a number of years, and 30 days would feel like a long time, I'm sure.
Yeah, it really was. And there were a lot of uncertainties along the way in the surgeries and different medical things that just weren't explainable. And to this day, we don't even know what caused the bleed. But we know it's gone now.
And when you were in the hospital, this wasn't your average, you get the surgery and you wait a few days, they observe you and they send you home, was it?
No, it wasn't. It started off that way, which was all good, but it was a short time after I was home. I had to go back in for a repeat CT scan. And when they did that, they determined that there was more fluid in my brain than there had been when they started. So they had to do another emergency surgery. And frankly, a lot of the time from there on, I don't recall because I was either medicated to the point that I wasn't aware or suffering from brain effects from the distraction that it had been on my brain and unable really to know certain things. At one point, I couldn't say my name. I couldn't spell my name. I couldn't move my right side. And I spent some time on a ventilator in the middle of all that as well.
And Deb, during this time, you used your writing to help you sort of keep your thoughts together, didn't you?
I sure did. I've always written when I'm stressed. So I had a big journal full of notes. I would talk to the doctor every day, and I had notebooks. I think I filled 4 notebooks with notes about the medical issues and the things that the doctor told me. So yeah, I like to write. It helps me.
Isn't it amazing, though, how having something as simple as a notebook, a journal, a log of exactly what you're feeling at that moment, isn't it amazing how that can fuel a whole book later on? You have to be willing, though, to be honest as you're writing, though, and pour it out. And that's the therapeutic element. But then you're able to translate that into fiction later. It's a beautiful thing. It really
Right.
is.
It is. It's, when you're going through a story, God has an intention for the story that you're going through. And I think part of it is telling the story after it's all over, because he wants us to share the way he comforted us. We comfort others. We pass it on through telling the story.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I 2 Corinthians 1:3-4. I just love that.
Yes.
Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our tribulations, so we can comfort those who are in any trouble with the comfort we receive from God. Those are my life verses and ones that I cherish because I've been through a lot. And it's amazing how when we go through things, God will lead those kind of people into our lives. Have you had that experience? Have you encountered people who have struggled similarly with their health or marriage or anything like that?
Well, with their marriages, certainly. We've been marriage mentors for over 10 years. So we have come in contact with many couples that have a whole myriad of stresses and situations, and they just need help navigating that from mentors. And so they come to ask for help from mentors.
Yeah, and hence the name of the book, Love on Life Support, because we did this for a mentor couple, and then we gave all my medical challenges to them. So their love was on life support, but then Chris, in the story that you read about, his life was on life support for periods of time through that as well.
Yeah, and we've met many couples whose marriage was on life support, so to speak.
Now let's explain first so that everybody knows, because I wasn't familiar with what marriage mentors are. What is that? What does that mean?
Well, we're not counselors. So a lot of people will say, we need counseling, but counselors are licensed by the state. They have a certain education requirement depending on what state you live in. Mentors are much more relational. We can do things that counselors can't do. Counselors can't be your friend. And there's certain barriers, boundaries that they have with their clients that we don't have those boundaries with our couples. But we are not licensed counselors. So there are some issues that we are not able to help couples with. And so we come alongside of them, we disciple them, because we do this, through the church. So not all mentors are Christian mentors. A mentor is actually somebody who's been where you are. So we always match up a mentor couple who's been married longer than the people that they're mentoring. So they have the experience to fall back on.
Sure. Now, we talked briefly about in our pre-production meeting about how important it was to you that you have the male perspective on a marital struggle. Why was that important to you?
Well, I think in general, most marital struggles, each party thinks the other party is at fault. And so it's helpful because as the man, I can spend time with the male spouse privately and not in front of his wife. And I can actually talk to him about some things that he's got to get control of and make changes about. And it's much harder to do that if you're always in front of both parties. And I think we brought out some of that in the book in terms of talking about the kind of things that men struggle with, their worship of their jobs, their worship of material things, and how that gets in the way really about in terms of being relational. And that's actually a journey that I went through this illness, because I was far more accomplishment oriented in my career, and also even still within that 1 year after I had retired. And I think, I don't think it's just the mechanics of the brain surgery. I think it's the emotional part of going through it, but it's almost as if God has made me a little more relational and a little more emotional and far less accomplishment oriented.
That's very true. And when we wrote the book, we wanted to make sure we had the male perspective of what really is in a man's heart. Right. And a lot of the times it's shame, deep shame that they carry. But I think that many books like ours, which are really written for women, primarily a women's audience, they don't tend to go that deep into a man's soul. And so a lot of women don't really understand their husbands. They don't understand the deep pain that men have. Yeah. And so we wanted to bring that out in our book.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, growing up, I used to think that, men maybe had less heart or had less emotional depth, literally couldn't feel as much as I felt. And I've come to see, as I have aged and been in relationships, I've come to see that they do. It just is expressed differently. It's processed differently, communicated differently. What do you think are some of the main topics that get in the way of a good marriage, or conflicts? What kinds of things are problematic?
A lot of it is conflicts that they create, but they don't realize they're doing it as they're doing it. They get busier and busier. They put more time and effort into kids' events and sports and things like that. And then suddenly they don't have as much time for each other. And that's a recipe for failure over a period of time.
Yeah, investing in your marriage is so important. And I think our priorities are not right. We think the kids are all important. And so we invest so much time and effort into the kids, but without a strong marriage behind them, the kids can flounder without that. So it's really priorities. And then that shows up in a myriad of ways, the way they communicate to each other, the way they solve problems, the way they handle stress, and then all the topics, finances and parenting and relationships with family and things like that. But the basic underlying cause is that they're not one. They haven't come together, and they don't look at their relationship as the most important one after their relationship with God.
I never even heard of that concept until I enrolled in the Jerry B. Jenkins Christian Writers apprenticeship program in 2007. And my mentor, Diane Mills, said, okay, prioritize the things in your life. And I'm thinking that she wants me to say writing, God and then writing. She wanted me to say God and then marriage and then kids and then writing at like the bottom. And I honestly, I'd never heard of that because everyone I knew always put their kids above their marriage.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then
Well, we
once
did
kids
too.
move out, what happened?
Right. Well, we did. Our parents did.
Right.
That's what the pattern we brought into our marriage too. And it wasn't until we became Christ followers and we began to learn what Christ's plan is for marriage that we realized that is not the right priority. And it really is the best priority for a strong, healthy family and healthy kids to have a strong marriage.
And I think that wrong priority plays out different for the man than it does for the woman. I think the woman is often very capable of investing relationally with the kids. And the man, if he's working, he will put more into work to get more money, to get more things and experiences for the kids.
Right.
And that's not what the man should be doing. The man needs to be present and being relational with the kids as well.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you do your counseling, you don't only work with Christians, right? You work with people who are kind of seeking and looking around and trying to figure out what they believe when they come to the church, correct?
Often
Right.
that's the case,
Mhm.
yes.
Yeah, we don't have any priorities or any requirements. In fact, we mentor couples that don't even go to our church.
Yeah. And we had talked about, different sources of conflict, but then conflict resolution often is in communication. Is that correct?
Well, it's a big part of it
Yeah.
for sure. The way we talk about each other, the way we share our perspective, and the way we listen. So most of us listen, kind of trying to formulate our next rebuttal or our response. But when you really listen for the feelings and the emotions behind what they're saying, that's when you can get on a different level, a more intimate level of communication. And so we teach our couples how to do that.
And how does that look, Bruce, when you're trying to talk to a man about how to communicate? How do you communicate that to him?
We do some exercises together with the husband and the wife, and we coach them as they're going through it to share their feelings when they're sharing something that they want, that they're being assertive about. And then we coach the other spouse to parrot it back and say, did I get that right? And so we do that as a couple. And if I'm really seeing that the man is struggling with that, I'll set some coffee time and go with him at a different time and talk to him about how that needs to improve. Because without the ability to talk to one another in a calm fashion, then you can't really resolve conflict. You have to not hate each other in order to start moving on to conflict.
Yeah. Forgiveness is a very difficult thing for people, I think.
Yes,
Yeah.
it definitely is.
And saying sorry is a very difficult thing too.
Yeah.
Sure. Yes, that's why we need a forgiving Lord that exemplifies it, because it's not easy. He created us with emotions, and our emotions can be a gift, and especially as a creative person,
Yeah.
Personally, as a creative person, I think that creative people feel things on a different level, because I think that our experiences are meant to be translated into other people's, imaginations and their consciousness. And in order to do that, we have to feel it, but that can cause excruciating pain. And the people around us who are not creators, they're just like, what is your problem? Snap out of it, move on.
Yeah.
It's like, no, this is supposed to be an article. This is supposed to be a book, Oh, but I'm sure you dealt with the gamut of emotions as both as marriage mentors, and then also what you went through during your actual experience with, in the hospital, after the hospital, writing this book. What was your ultimate goal in writing this book?
Do you want to go? Yeah.
Yeah, we got together. We went up north and went on a little trip a couple months after Bruce got back from the hospital, so he could read through all my journals and all my notebooks, because he really didn't know what was going on at the time when I was here by myself at home. And it was really moving for him to read what I had written and understand what I was really going through. And we talked about it a lot that weekend, and we knew right away that God was calling us to write in some way, to write this story out. And we had written a little booklet that we gave out at our 40th wedding anniversary. We call it Legacy, and we got it published and a cover and everything, but we've never sold it. We just give it to people that we know. And it has, kind of the story of our marriage for the first 40 years. And our coming to Christ as well. And our coming to Christ. Right. I mean, all the things that we went through in 40 years. And so we were thinking, well, we could do that again, like part 2, or we could write, for a larger audience and publish a book. And so we were just kind of tossing ideas around and wondering what God wanted us to do with that. And Bruce was reading a blog post to me. We were driving home, I think. Yeah. And it said... she was driving home. I was driving because he wasn't allowed to drive yet. That was a lot of fun, let me tell you. So in the blog post, it said, write your memoir as if it's a fiction story. And so I thought, well, that's interesting. What if we wrote this as a fiction story? I knew that fiction reaches more people. A memoir usually doesn't reach very many people unless you're famous, and we're not famous. We're not. So we started tossing ideas like, well, what if we wrote this as a fiction and the couple is struggling in their marriage and they have marriage mentors? And so we just kind of started tossing the ideas around, and we really felt like that was where God was leading us. We talked to an agent that we know, and she confirmed that that's probably a great way to go rather than a memoir. Mm-hmm. And so we started writing. Yeah, and I have to say, because we had done that other book called Legacy, which we did, I think, in 30 days. We got it all together and published in 30 days. Yeah. So I was of the impression this wouldn't take very long, but that was more like a memoir. It wasn't a novel. Right. And Debbie kept saying to me, I've never written a novel. This is going to be more challenging. And I said, well, how bad could it be? It's not as bad as brain surgery. We were wrong. I was wrong. She was right.
Oh my goodness. Well, what's interesting though, is that wasn't it your occupational therapist that kind of challenged you to use this in a way that could help others?
Yeah, she said we should do something, or I should do something that I had never done before. And Debbie quickly tried to get me to latch onto this as something that I'd never done before. And we did want to write it. So it was right up the alley. But it was a difficult thing for, I think, both of us to write as a novelist. And I think it was really hard for me because there was a time not too far before that where I didn't even know words. It wasn't that I couldn't speak, I didn't know the words. I couldn't make, if somebody gave me a quarter, a dime, and a nickel, I couldn't determine what that amount was. So by doing the writing, it brought back a lot faster than it might have otherwise. And using a thesaurus, and we had an emotions thesaurus. We had a feelings wheel, a lot of different things to help me get beyond what most men would say when you'd ask them how they're doing. They're either fine, good, or bad. Those were the three adjectives. So I had to dig and find some others.
Well, we both had a lot to learn. Our editors were amazing
Yeah.
and kept telling us, I'm not doing this for you. You can do it. And we kept saying, this is really hard, but we can do it better together. We really believe that we needed to do it together.
Well, let's do a shout out. Who are your editors?
Sue Fairchild.
Yeah, Sue Fairchild.
So awesome. She just helped us so much. And before that, we had an editor that we hired on our own. Her name is Laura Doncho. And she was great help too.
Yes. It makes a huge difference to have an objective and, educated perspective on our writing, because I really believe God created our minds with autocorrect, and we don't see our mistakes after we've read it.
Oh, no.
Times.
That's very true.
And then you give it a week and you come back and you're like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I didn't see that, but you don't see it. Good job, fresh eyes. So you mentioned change, Bruce, and you couldn't put together a nickel, a dime, and a quarter and figure out how. What is your career background?
I was a CFO for about half of my career in fairly big companies, and a CEO for the other half. So I knew public speaking and I knew the numbers, but I didn't know them at the time that I was at my lowest after the surgery.
So you had been a chief financial officer, a chief executive officer, and how did you write your name the first time they asked you to write it after?
Oh, yeah. So they had asked me my name, and what I said was gibberish. I could tell it was gibberish. It didn't concern me, but I knew it was gibberish. They gave me a whiteboard and a pen, and I thought, now we're really making progress. I can spell it. And I spelled H. And I looked at that and I knew it wasn't right. So I erased it and tried it again. Same thing. So I was really I had a hard time communicating. There was a period where all I could say was, yeah. And Debbie decided to test me, and she asked if we could get a new puppy. And I learned the word no very quickly.
That's always been a running joke, because I want a dog and he doesn't. So I said, Bruce, I have a question for you. Can I get a dog now? And first he went like this. He still had, I think you still had the ventilator.
Maybe. I don't know.
I mean, it was unbelievable.
Now, can either one of you return to that moment when he was writing H, and remember exactly how you felt at that particular moment? Do you remember? You said, Bruce, I think you said that it was troublesome but not fearful.
Yeah. And I think this is something that they should teach all brain surgeons or all doctors, because my brain surgeon told me from the first to the second surgery, anytime there was a symptom, he would explain to me, I have seen this before. He would tell me before the surgeries, you might have this, you might have that. It will be temporary. And by that point in time, he had so much credibility with us. We didn't pick him. It was an emergency situation. He was a Christian, born again Christian. And his family prayed for us. He prayed before each surgery. So he just had this incredible credibility with me. So when a patient can believe, then I think they heal faster and they don't fret about it. And they just feel like, okay, he said this would happen. We'll just have to wait it out a bit.
Mm-hmm. And you, Debbie, how did you feel?
Well, I wasn't there, so I didn't observe it happening.
Right.
I didn't know that until later. But what I did know, as soon as he came out, he was able to get off the ventilator, because he was put on the ventilator because he had uncontrollable seizures. And so they had to put him on a ventilator because they gave him so much medication. He was having trouble breathing. Yeah. It was really one of the lowest time during the whole 30 days. And as he came out of the medication and was able to breathe on his own, and they saw that the seizures had stopped, that's when they started asking him questions, and they realized he could just say, yeah. And so the wonderful PA would FaceTime with me with her own cell phone so that I could talk to Bruce. And so I had my notebook ready, and I'd write every word that I could understand. And he was like babbling, like
Yeah.
he never talks that much, but he had a lot to tell me, but I couldn't understand a single word except yeah. And then a couple hours later, I'd call him, talk to him again, and I could catch more words. And then I could catch phrases. And over just maybe a few days, it was amazing how fast it came back. And so that was so hopeful for me. And I kept listening to the doctor too. He would call me every single day, tell me what was going on, told me, I've seen this happen before. It's called aphasia, but it was not because of damage to the brain, but irritation and the infection that he had in his brain. And that, he just kept reassuring both of us. We really believed him, and I trusted God with this. I knew that, our faith was strong, and no matter what the outcome, that God would work something good out of it.
And you said that the writing process encouraged the recovery.
Yeah, it did. It sped up the recovery. I have to say, when I read Debbie's journals, that was a really hard time for me because I didn't really know what she went through on the other side of it.
Sure.
And when I came home, she was still trying to encourage me and build me up and get me moving to where more and more came back. So she wasn't really telling me what it had been like on her side. We went away to that cottage. I read her journals, and then I wrote. She asked me to write what I was feeling. So I wrote what I could remember that I was feeling. And of course, it was probably 10% of the magnitude of her journals because I'm a guy and because there wasn't that much that I could remember.
Sure.
But I do know right from the beginning, before it got real bad in my case, we said God must have something in mind for this. And so the first thing that I did while I was in there in the early days, I would ask the staff that would come visit me, was there something I could pray about for them? And you have to realize at that time that the healthcare workers were scared. They had no idea what tomorrow would bring, and they weren't sure whether they would get the virus. I was never around the virus. I was isolated from it. But still, there were days they were going to have to work in that environment. So I think they appreciated that a brain surgery patient would be wanting to know how could he pray for them. And I think it made their day a little easier.
Yeah, that continued throughout the whole time. Even when he wasn't able to ask that question anymore, I would ask whenever I called. I had a huge long list of people that I was praying for, and they had so much fear about bringing this disease home.
Yeah.
It was a scary time for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, when you talk about, your feelings and all of, and the way that it all impacted you, and I know from what I have read here that you were trying to infuse all of those feelings in here. How did you pick and choose what you were experiencing in order to develop this plot? How did you do that?
Oh, to develop the plot. Well, the finance part of me really likes spreadsheets. We found something called the snowflake spreadsheet method to writing a novel. And so we basically wrote the scenes in snippets and then decided who was going to be writing it. I wrote the men parts, Debbie wrote the women parts, and then we had to have Debbie spruce up the parts that I wrote because they were more like just the facts, ma'am. And so that's kind of something that really fit to my capabilities because one of our editors, I won't name who it is, but she knows who she is, at one point told us, I got to page 67, it's not ready to edit. And we had to make a major change to it. And we moved it between a back and forth between history and the real-time timeline of the tragedy itself. And that became helpful when we had the spreadsheet because you can cut and paste and move things around and keep track of, wait a minute, we haven't said that yet. We haven't introduced this yet. So I think maybe from a structural point of view, that played better to what my background was.
Yeah, that was wonderful. He handles spreadsheets really well, and the plot. I mean, the basic plot, the basic timeline of the story changed a lot back and forth as we rearranged things, and that that was so helpful that he was able to do that.
Yeah. The medical part of the story was pretty easy to get right because we had all Debbie's journals, and we had like 2 inches of paper that we could access from the hospital that showed everything, every medication, every person who visited, every doctor, what they wrote, every result. So we could keep very true to that timeline.
Absolutely. Well, you talked a little bit there about prayer and about how important that was. How important was prayer in your own relationship during this time? You were praying for others. Did you find yourself praying for each other during the book writing process, or
Yeah.
how did that look?
Yeah, it was prayers like, help us, God. We need help.
Yeah. And I think it's hard to be creative with 2 people who have different degrees of creativity and they're differently gifted. But if you can get through it, I think the result is better in the end.
Mm-hmm. We did believe that all the way through, that God would do something special with this story and that we could do it better together, even though it's harder to do it better together. Like in a marriage, it's not easy to take 2 people that are different and bring them together as one to have the same goals in their family and in their lives. It's much easier to do it on your own, but it's better together, and it's God's plan.
And we talked a little bit about your marriage mentors program, how important it is that couples pray together.
Yeah.
And how crucial that could be to the healing process. How do you present that when people are in your sessions?
We pray with them, so we model that. That's one of the best ways to do that. We encourage them to pray together and give them ideas of how to do that. We can't really force that. It's something that they have to grow into, and something we grew into also. We had, it was a long time before we really prayed together. We were older when we came to know Jesus, and so we had lots of bad habits in our lives, and learning how to pray together was being vulnerable, being intimate in a spiritual sense. That was a place of growth. And I know statistically, most couples do not pray together. Even the majority of pastors do not pray with their wives. So it's a pretty common struggle that couples have, because it's very vulnerable when you pray out loud.
And I think some of the struggles can be overcome. So quite often there's a time of the day that one spouse or the other is fresh and the other is tired. So if you try to pick in the morning, that might not work for both of them. If you try to pick at night, one of them's liable to fall asleep before the prayer is over. Then you have different styles of praying that we actually tried to build a little bit of that into the book, where Chris, when they finally prayed together, he started to say he was frustrated that he wouldn't have anything left to pray about because she would pray first. So he would just say, yeah, and everything that she said, God. And we finally got to the end of the book where Amy said that after Chris had prayed a soft prayer for them. So you have not only the vulnerability, but you just have mechanical things about who's fresh when and what's one person's style versus another.
Personalities play a role, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Personality
Absolutely.
type. Yeah. When you talk about people, in your biography, you had said that no matter what, there's always hope. And this was clearly a very dark time for you. How do you think your book demonstrates that there's always hope, even in the darkest time?
Well, we do show, we don't want to give away the end of the book, but but we do, I do feel like the story has a good ending in the spiritual sense, without giving away the physical ending of the story. And really, ultimately, the good ending that we're all looking forward to is being with Christ and growing before we're at the end of their life here, growing to be more and more like him. And he often uses difficult things to help us grow. It's when we really realize that we need him. And for me, being here by myself, completely alone during those 30 days, my faith grew because he was here with me every minute of the day. It was like being on a retreat in some ways, even though I was struggling with Bruce being gone and not knowing. I mean, there were days when I couldn't even talk to him because they lost his phone charger, or he couldn't figure out how to use his phone.
Or the face recognition didn't like all the bandages on my head.
Facial recognition failed. I had to rely on God like I hadn't done before.
And I think because Debbie was keeping a prayer request with a large group of people and an update with them, I think they saw what was going on. They felt when it was getting really hopeless in their minds, but they didn't see that in what she was writing. Her writing was clearly portraying the hope.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah, I had a huge long list of people I emailed, texted. I was on the phone a lot all day talking to people and sharing that. I really knew that I needed community more than ever. And I couldn't be with people. Our daughter, she would come and bring groceries, put them in the garage. Then I'd go out to the garage and wash all the boxes. I mean, she would come and sit on the porch and we'd sit 6 feet apart with masks on.
In the middle of winter.
In the middle of winter.
In Michigan. Yeah.
It was spring technically, but in Michigan, it's pretty cold in March. So, I did have community to the degree that I was able to find community. And I did everything that I could to do that and openly share what was happening.
Mm-hmm.
And as a believer, and when you're in the hospital and it's a dark situation, you know that if you would pass that minute, you'd be in paradise. So it's a little selfish to think that way, but it probably was part of the reason why being in the hospital wasn't as scary to me as it might be if you weren't a believer.
Sure, absolutely. I don't think that's selfish at all. I think that's honest. That's honest. And I think sometimes when we are in what seems like the worst case scenario, we can realize that that isn't the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario would be cut off from God.
Yeah,
right.
And when you're in that worst case scenario, people are on high alert emotionally and spiritually to be praying for you. And you find yourself covered in this cloak of comforting warmth and prayer, and people are praying, God's with you, and it's like, oh, this isn't so bad. And then you get better and they quit praying for you all the time, and you realize this is actually harder.
That's when it becomes your turn to pray for them.
Yes.
I know. But I do appreciate what you said, Debbie, about the companionship of God and how that got you through when you were completely isolated, because you can reach a point where you don't even realize you're alone if you're in constant communication with God. And it's a wonderful space to be in. Bruce, I just want to toss this out because we had talked about how your initial symptom in all of this was headaches.
Yeah.
In case there's anybody watching who may or may not have experienced something like this, or who may be experiencing symptoms right now, would you mind just sharing very quickly so they could be aware and prevent maybe what happened to you?
Yeah, that's a great idea. So I think it, like anything in the healthcare system these days, you really have to have a lot of knowledge to push the treatment yourself, or to at least be sure you know what the options are. And in this case, there was a principal doctor for me who I hadn't seen normally, but she was stepping in for someone else who was younger in the practice. And just for coincidence, or because God deemed it to be that way, she stepped in and she asked me to do the drunk walk where you put one foot in front of the other and you walk, 10, 15 steps. And she had me do this in the office. And both times I tried it, I hit the wall. And I hit the wall because I had been losing balance, but it was happening very slowly, and I'd been accommodating for it. But when you try to walk with one foot in front of the other and your arms out and nothing to steady yourself on, you can't fake it. So that's when she said, I think you need an MRI. And I think I believe maybe that was being held off simply to say that's a pretty extravagant step to go to and move to go to. But I have to admit, when she said it, I was relieved, because I honestly thought I must have had something like a cancer or a tumor in my brain. And I had felt that for most of those 3 months. So I guess the public service announcement is check and ask questions and be willing to bring others into the diagnosis the sooner you can. By the time I had that MRI, they considered it an emergency situation, and I had surgery 3 days later. So.
Yeah, what normally happens is people will bump their head or fall or have a blow to the head that causes this kind of a bleed. It's called a hematoma. And so most people know right away there's something wrong. But Bruce's was unusual. I don't think there's very many people that have the situation that he had, a slow bleed over many months. Right. And then later on, he developed another condition that our surgeon told us that most surgeons never see one in their whole practice. And so our surgeon had never seen this. So it's a pretty rare thing that happened to Bruce.
Yeah.
Thankfully.
Yeah. And you said, so it was dizziness, lack of balance, headaches, things of that ilk. Okay. All right.
Yep.
Good to know. Always good to know. Unexplained symptoms. Always good to know.
Yeah.
So if anybody is interested in connecting with you, how can they do that?
Our website is debpots.com, and they can find there some gifts for their marriage, some free gifts. So we have a little ebook. It's called Better Together. It includes a link to a free personality assessment and then some charts where you can look at different traits and your differences and learn how to come together and how to improve your relationship based on your differences. We have a little, just a short little white paper to help you understand what mentoring is and what the difference between mentoring and counseling is. And there's a blog there and links to our book and then my other 2 books. I have 2 other books as well.
And we also are putting things on other marriage resources as we see them, and they seem noteworthy to us so that people can find it. So curate it in some way.
Yeah, we're also Prepare and Rich trainers. So Prepare and Rich is a nationally known marriage assessment. And so we train professionals, counselors, social workers, and we'll bring it into churches and train teams so that they can begin their own marriage mentor program.
Mm-hmm. And so spell your last name in case anybody's looking for Deb Potts.
It's P as in Peter, O-T-T-S.
All right, 2 T's.
2 T's.
Yeah.
There are half a dozen or more ways to spell Christy, so I'm used to spelling my name all the time.
Yeah.
And Bruce, if they don't go to your website, where else can they get your book?
At Amazon. Yeah.
Barnes and Noble.
Barnes and Noble.
All the major sites.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I've so enjoyed our conversation. I'm going to scroll back through the comments a little bit, see if anybody has any questions. If you have any questions for Deb and Bruce right now, now's the time to ask them. I'm just going to scroll back a little bit. Everybody is saying hello to us, and we have Dorinda Babcock. I believe you know her. She's on.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Deb Haggerty. Hello, ladies. My friend Cindy is watching. Peggy Sewell, she's another Elk Lake sister. And let's see. Oh, my friend Chad's on. My mom's on. Hello. My mom lived in a Sears home in Xenia, Ohio. The parsonage. She was the pastor's kid. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
My friends Cindy and Dean are on. Hello. Luther Taylor. You a friend of yours?
Elizabeth Taylor.
No, Luther. Luther Taylor.
Luther.
Oh, Luther.
Oh,
yes,
yeah,
Luther's
yeah.
a friend of ours.
Yes.
Hi, Luther.
Real happy to see you both. And my friend Judy's on, and she's saying hello to you. Oh, my goodness. Sue Fairchild as well.
Hi, Sue.
She says, inspiring story. And Deb Haggerty says that she is thankful for your spreadsheets, Bruce, and that great editors help. And my friend Judy is saying, she's offering the prayer hands. She really appreciated this tonight. So, and Sue is saying hi to you both. Is there anything you wanted to say in closing?
Just thank you for this opportunity.
My pleasure.
We really appreciate being able to tell the story and share that hope with couples, that there is hope.
Yeah, no matter what, there is hope.
Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate you. Thank you, everyone who has watched. For everybody's going to watch on the replay, feel free to share it. And I just hope that you have a wonderful night. And thanks again. And happy early Easter to everybody.
Thanks. You too.
All right. Well, we'll see you next week. My guest next week is Donna Stearns, and we'll be talking about her book, The Nazarene's Price, which will be appropriate for Easter Monday.
Yeah.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.